They called it a marriage, but the way he stepped back when she reached for the door made it feel like something else entirely. The paper hit the table with a dry tap. Outside, a horse snorted and stamped against frozen ground. Lorraine's fingers hovered above the pen, not shaking, just still, like she was waiting for something no one else could see. Across from her, the man who would be her husband didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even reach for her hand. Why didn't he? Tell me what you think he was about to do. There are punishments that arrive dressed in good manners. That morning, the front room of the Hayes Ranch held the kind of quiet that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Sunlight slipped through lace curtains and laid itself across the polished floorboards in long, pale strips. A pot of tea rested on the small table between two chairs, steam rising in a thin, steady line. Everything was in its place. Everything was proper. Lorraine Hayes stood near the window. Her hands were folded lightly at her waist. Not tight, not loose, just enough to keep them still. The dark blue of her dress caught the light without asking for it. The collar sat high against her neck, pinned clean. Her hair was drawn back with care. There was nothing in her appearance that called attention, and somehow that made the room feel sharper, not softer. Behind her, the clock on the wall ticked with quiet certainty. Across from her sat Calvin Hayes and his wife, Margaret. He held a paper in one hand, though he did not look at it often. He didn't need to. The words had already been decided before they ever reached the page. "We've given this careful thought," he said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried the same weight as the ranch itself, as the fences that stretched past the far hills, as the cattle moving slow under the morning sun. Margaret lifted her teacup, took a small sip, and set it back down without a sound. "It's for stability," she added. "For order." Lorraine did not turn. Outside the window, two ranch hands crossed the yard, laughing at something one of them said. A horse shifted in the corral, the leather of a saddle creaking as it moved. Dust lifted in the distance where the road bent toward town. Life moved the way it always had. Inside, nothing moved at all. Calvin placed the paper on the table between them. The sound was soft, almost nothing. "You'll be married by the end of the week," he said, "to a man named Wyatt Boone." He let the name sit there. "He works a small piece of land east of Dry Creek. Keeps to himself. It's a suitable arrangement." Suitable. The word settled into the room like it belonged there. Lorraine's gaze stayed on the window, on the line where the yard met the open land. Her reflection hovered faint in the glass. For a moment, it looked like someone else standing there, someone who had already stepped aside. Margaret adjusted the edge of her glove. "It will be good for you," she said. "A simpler life, a clearer understanding of things. No one asked a question. No one waited for an answer." The clock ticked again. Lorraine drew in a breath. Not deep. Just enough to remind herself it was still there. "Yes, sir," she said. Her voice came out even. It did not catch. It did not break. It sounded like something practiced, something learned over years of knowing when words mattered and when they didn't. Calvin nodded once, as if a task had been completed. That settled then. He reached for his cup. Outside, the laughter faded as the men moved out of sight. A wagon rolled past the far fence, its wheels groaning under weight. Somewhere beyond the house, a gate shut with a hollow clang. Lorraine's eyes followed the empty stretch of road. There had been no raised voice, no hand striking the table, no threat spoken aloud. Only a piece of paper. Only a decision placed carefully where it could not be refused. She shifted her weight slightly, the fabric of her dress whispering against itself. For a brief moment, her fingers loosened at her waist. then came together again. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. "We'll begin preparations this afternoon." Lorraine nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She turned then, finally, away from the window. The room looked the same as it had when she entered. The tea, the chairs, the paper resting flat between them. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had already moved. As she stepped toward the door, Calvin spoke again, almost as an afterthought. "He'll be here tomorrow to sign the rest." Lorraine paused with her hand on the handle, a single nod. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the light. The air outside was warmer than she expected. The smell of hay and dust settled around her, familiar and steady. A breeze moved across the yard, lifting the edge of her sleeve just enough to remind her the day had begun like any other. One of the ranch hands tipped his hat as he passed. "Morning, Miss Hayes." She returned the gesture with a small incline of her head. The same as always. She walked along the edge of the porch, down the steps, and into the yard. The ground felt firm beneath her boots. The sky stretched wide overhead, untroubled, without sign of what had just taken place inside those walls. Near the gate, she stopped. The road beyond ran straight for a while before bending out of sight toward Dry Creek, toward a place she had never needed to go. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached out and rested her hand against the wooden post of the fence. The surface was rough, worn smooth in places by years of use. It held steady under her touch. Somewhere behind her, the front door opened and closed again. Voices resumed inside, low and ordinary, as if nothing had been decided at all. Lorraine kept her eyes on the road. There were punishments that left marks, and there were others that asked for nothing more than a signature. This one was already done. She stood there a while longer, then let her hand fall from the post and turned back toward the house. Her steps measured, her shoulders straight, carrying forward into a life that had already been chosen for her. And no one in the yard thought to stop her. No one thought to ask. No one knew. The sun climbed higher. The day moved on. And the sentence held. By late afternoon, the sky had taken on that pale, stretched look that came before evening settled in. Dust followed the road in slow drifts as a wagon rolled past the Hayes gate, wheels groaning under dry wood and iron. Lorraine stood on the porch when he arrived. Wyatt Boone did not come with any announcement. No escort, no show of purpose. Just a single horse, dark-coated and lean, moving at an even pace. He reined in a few yards from the steps and sat there a moment, as if measuring distance. He removed his hat. "Ma'am." His voice was low, not soft, just steady. Lorraine stepped down from the porch. The boards creaked once under her weight, then fell quiet again. She stopped at the last step, leaving space between them. "Yes." Up close, he looked as he had from a distance. Clean shirt, though the cuffs had worn thin. Hands marked by work. Not hurried, not uncertain. He held out a folded paper. "Need your name here," he said, tapping a place near the bottom. "Lawman in town said it's enough if both of us sign." Lorraine took the paper. The ink had dried uneven, some letters darker than others. She read it through once, her eyes moving without pause. When she finished, she reached for the pencil tucked behind her ear, pressed the tip to the page, and wrote her name in a straight, careful line. Wyatt watched her hand. Not the letters, just the movement. When she handed the paper back, he nodded once. "Thank you." No more was said. The next morning, the town church sat open at the back, its door pushed wide to let in air that didn't move much. A narrow window let in a thin stripe of light that stopped short of the center of the room. There were 4 people inside. The preacher stood near the front, a small book open in his hands. A man from the general store leaned against the wall, hat in hand. A woman Lorraine had seen once or twice in town sat near the aisle, her gloved fingers folded tight. Wyatt stood to Lorraine's left. One step away. He had washed his shirt again. It showed in the way the fabric held its shape, stiff along the collar. His boots were clean, though the leather had cracks that polishing couldn't hide. The preacher spoke. The words came in order, practiced and short. Questions that needed answers, names that needed saying. Lorraine heard her own name and answered when it was her turn. The sound of it felt separate, as if it belonged to the room more than to her. Wyatt spoke once. I do. No hesitation, no weight added to it. Just the words, set down and left where they were. The preacher closed the book. That's done then. No one clapped. No one moved forward. The woman in the chair stood, nodded politely, and stepped outside. The man by the wall followed. The room emptied around them. Lorraine stepped out first. The air outside felt cooler than before, though the sun still sat high. She drew in a breath that stayed with her longer than the ones inside. Behind her, Wyatt came down the steps. He did not walk beside her. Not yet. He kept a few feet between them, enough to make the space clear without making it feel like distance. The wagon waited at the edge of the road. It was older than most, the wood worn smooth at the corners, the iron rims dulled from long use. A canvas cover stretched over the back, tied down in places where the rope had been replaced more than once. Wyatt moved ahead, lifting a small trunk into the wagon bed. He set it down carefully, adjusting it until it sat flat. Lorraine climbed up without help. The bench was narrow. The leather seat cracked along one side. She sat with her hands folded again, the same as before, though the air around her had changed. Wyatt took his place beside her. He picked up the reins, gave a quiet signal, and the horse stepped forward. The ranch faded behind them without ceremony. No one came out to watch. No one called after them. The gate stood open, unmoved. They rode in silence. The road turned from packed dirt to loose gravel as they moved farther from town. The land stretched wider here. Fences gave way to open ground. Dry brush caught at the edges of the path. Once Lorraine glanced sideways. Wyatt's eyes stayed on the road. His hands held the reins steady. Not tight, not loose. After a while, the sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the land. The air cooled. A breeze moved across the open space, carrying the smell of dust and something distant, like rain that might never come. They reached the house near dusk. It stood alone. Rough wood, low roof, a narrow window on one side. A small corral sat to the left, its fence leaning slightly inward. A bucket rested near the well, half filled, the rope coiled beside it. Wyatt climbed down first. He moved to the back of the wagon, untied the rope, and lifted the trunk down. He set it near the door, then stepped back. Lorraine climbed down on her own. The ground felt different here, softer in places, uneven. She looked at the house, taking it in without expression. Wyatt opened the door. Inside, the room was clean, not carefully arranged, but kept in order. A table against the wall, 2 chairs, a stove near the corner, a kettle resting on top. A bed stood along the far side. He carried the trunk inside and placed it near the wall, leaving space around it. Enough room to move without brushing against it. "You take the bed," he said. Lorraine turned toward him. "And you?" Wyatt nodded toward the back. "Out there." She followed his gesture. Through the open doorway at the rear, a small covered space showed, just enough room for a blanket and a wooden crate. Lorraine looked back at him. "We're married," she said. Not a question, just a statement, set down to see how it would rest. Wyatt met her eyes for a moment. "I know." A pause, then quieter. I don't take what ain't asked. The words stayed where they fell. Not heavy, not light. Just enough to change the air between them. Wyatt turned then, stepping outside without waiting for a reply. His boots sounded once on the threshold, then softened against the dirt beyond. Lorraine stood alone in the room. The house settled around her. Wood creaked once, then stilled. The kettle gave a faint sound as the heat beneath it shifted. She walked to the table and set her hand against it. The surface was worn smooth, edges rounded by time and use. Outside, Wyatt moved about, the quiet rhythm of his steps steady and unhurried. Lorraine drew in a breath. It stayed with her longer this time, not because it was easier, but because it had not been taken from her. Night came slowly, and for the first time since the paper had been placed on the table, something in the sentence did not feel entirely closed. The house held the quiet like it was used to it. Lorraine lay on the bed, still dressed, her hands resting over her middle the way they had that morning. The blanket beneath her carried the faint scent of sun and wood smoke. She did not close her eyes right away. Outside, the sound of Wyatt settling in came in small pieces. The shift of a boot, the soft drag of fabric. Then stillness. No footsteps returning. No door opening. The space between them stayed where it had been set. She turned her head slightly toward the window. The sky had darkened to a deep blue, the kind that made the stars seem closer than they were. One flickered just above the edge of the roofline. Lorraine watched it until her breathing slowed, until the day loosened its hold just enough for sleep to find her. Morning arrived without announcement. A pale line of light slipped through the window and stretched across the floorboards. The air held that early chill that came before the sun had time to settle in. Lorraine sat up. For a moment, she listened. No movement inside. She swung her feet to the floor and stood. The boards gave a small creak under her weight. The room answered with quiet. When she stepped into the front room, the kettle was already on the stove. Not boiling, just warm. A thin thread of steam curled upward, steady and patient. Lorraine paused. There was no note, no sign of when it had been placed there, only the fact of it. She reached out and touched the handle. Warm, not hot. Set early, then left. Through the open doorway, she could see the yard. Wyatt was already at the well, drawing water. The rope slid against wood with a familiar scrape, bucket rising slow and even. He did not look toward the house. Lorraine turned back inside. She moved through the room, opening her trunk, taking out a folded cloth, setting it on the table. Each motion carried the weight of habit meeting something new. She poured water into a cup. The metal rang lightly against the rim. Outside, Wyatt set the bucket down and carried it toward the side of the house. His steps were measured, the same as the day before. When he passed the doorway, he slowed. Not stopping. Just enough to mark the space. Lorraine stood at the table. He waited. The pause lasted no more than a breath. Then she stepped back half a pace. Wyatt moved past the threshold, setting the bucket near the wall. He did not look at her directly, not avoiding, not searching, just keeping the distance clear. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He nodded once and stepped back outside. The door remained open. The day found its shape in small ways. Lorraine swept the floor. The broom bristles whispered against the wood, gathering dust into quiet lines. She opened the window when the air inside grew thick, letting the breeze pass through without asking anything in return. Wyatt worked outside. The sound of hammer against wood came steady, not rushed. A loose board on the side of the house was set back into place, each strike placed carefully. By midday, the sun stood high. Heat pressed down lightly, not harsh yet, but enough to slow the air. Lorraine moved to the stove. She worked with what she found: a sack of beans, a small piece of salted meat wrapped in cloth. The knife lay where it had been left, blade turned inward, clean. She cut carefully, not wasting, not testing. The pot warmed. The smell rose, thin at first, then fuller. Outside, Wyatt's hammering stopped. His steps crossed the yard. He paused at the doorway. Lorraine did not turn. The pot shifted under her hand. Steam rose, thicker now. A moment passed. Then another. "Smells all right," Wyatt said. Not praise, just a fact set down. Lorraine stirred once. "It'll do." He stepped inside then, slow enough to make the movement known. He moved to the far side of the table and set his hat down. Dust marked the brim where his hand had held it. He washed his hands at the basin. Thorough, quiet. When he finished, he stepped back, waiting. Lorraine lifted the pot. Her hand slipped. The edge caught the lip of the stove, and the broth spilled over, running down the side with a sharp hiss as it met the heat. Lorraine pulled back. The smell changed. Burnt, sudden. She reached for a cloth, pressing it to the side, trying to steady the pot. Wyatt took one step forward, then stopped, half a step short. "May I?" he asked. Lorraine did not answer right away. The pot trembled slightly under her grip. Then she shifted her hand, just enough to make space. Wyatt moved in. His hands were quick but not hurried. He steadied the pot, lifted it clear, set it back square on the stove. He turned the heat down with a small adjustment, then stepped back again. No more. The moment closed as simply as it had opened. Lorraine wiped the edge of the stove. The smell settled. When they sat to eat, the portions were even. 2 plates, set apart just enough. They ate without speaking. The only sound was the soft tap of spoon against metal. Halfway through, Wyatt reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He set it near the edge of the table and nudged it toward her. Lorraine looked at it, then at him. "What is it?" "They gave it to me in town," he said. "Said I ought to sign." He did not touch the paper again. Lorraine opened it. The print was clear. Straight lines, simple words, a receipt, payment owed, a mark at the bottom where a name should be. She glanced up. "Do you know what it says?" Wyatt shook his head. "I know where the mark goes." The word settled without defense. Lorraine looked back at the page. Then she folded it once and set it aside. "We'll see to it later," she said. Wyatt nodded. Nothing more. That evening, the light faded slower than it had the night before. The sky held its color longer, stretching the day just a little further. Lorraine sat at the table, the paper still near her hand. Wyatt stood by the door, his hat already in place. "I'll be up top," he said. She nodded. He climbed the ladder outside, each step even, the wood creaking once under his weight. Lorraine listened until the sound settled. Then she reached for the paper again. Her fingers traced the line where a name should be. Not yet written, not yet claimed. She set it down. The house grew quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. One that did not press. One that waited. And somewhere in that waiting, something had shifted. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking. Steady enough to remain. Winter did not arrive all at once. It came in small changes. The mornings held their cold a little longer. The ground stayed hard underfoot past sunrise. The wind carried less dust and more edge. By the time the first frost showed along the fence line, The house had already begun to adjust without either of them saying so. Wyatt worked fewer days in town. He still left early. Hat low, coat pulled tight at the collar. But he came back sooner now, sometimes before the light had fully turned, sometimes with nothing in his hands. Lorraine noticed without asking. The sack of beans near the wall grew lighter. The small piece of salt pork was cut thinner each time it was used. The kettle stayed on the stove longer, not because it was needed, but because it filled the room with something that felt like more than what they had. At supper, Wyatt set both plates the same. Always the same. But Lorraine began to see the difference in the way he ate. He slowed sooner, set his spoon down earlier, sat a little longer before pushing his chair back. "I'm full," he would say. The first time she nodded. The second time, she watched. By the third, she counted without meaning to. The way his portion stayed just a little larger until it wasn't. The way the bread shifted slightly closer to her side of the table when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, she reached for the loaf and found it already turned, the cut edge facing her. She did not mention it. The next morning, she put on her coat. Wyatt was by the door, tightening the strap on his glove. "You heading out?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at her boots, then at the sky. "Road's hard past the bend. Watch the ice by Dry Creek." "I will." He stepped aside. Not in question, not in doubt. Just making room. The town sat quieter in winter. Fewer wagons, fewer voices. The boardwalk held the sound of footsteps sharper than before. The wind moved between buildings like it had somewhere else to be. Lorraine stopped first at the general store. The bell above the door rang once as she stepped in. The man behind the counter looked up, then down again, as if the sight of her required no second thought. "I'm looking for work," she said. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "Ain't much of that now." "I can teach," she said. "Reading, writing." He glanced toward the back room, then shook his head. "Folks got their own to mind this season." She nodded once. "Thank you." Outside, the wind pressed against her coat. She tried the church next. The door was locked. By the time she reached the far end of town, her fingers had gone stiff inside her gloves. She turned to leave when a voice called from behind her. "You're the one from Boone's place, aren't you?" Lorraine turned. An older woman stood in the doorway of a narrow house, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back, streaked gray, her eyes steady. "Mrs. Dalton," the woman said, as if offering something simple. Lorraine inclined her head. "Yes, ma'am." "I heard you asking at the store," Mrs. Dalton said. "Come inside. It's too cold for standing." The room was small but warm. A fire burned low in the stove. 2 chairs sat near a narrow table, a stack of thin books resting at one end. "My grandson's been meaning to learn his letters," Mrs. Dalton said. "Can't say I've the patience for it anymore." Lorraine stepped closer to the table. She touched one of the books. The pages were worn, edges soft from use. "I can help," she said. Mrs. Dalton studied her for a moment. "Evenings," she said, "when the boy's done with chores." Lorraine nodded. "That will do." When she returned home, the sky had already begun to dim. Wyatt was splitting wood near the side of the house. The sound of the axe carried clean through the cold air, each strike measured, each piece falling where it should. He stopped when he saw her. "You went far," he said. "Far enough." A pause. "I found work." He rested the axe against the stump. "What kind?" "Teaching." He nodded once. "Good." Nothing more. That evening, the table held 2 plates again. Lorraine set them down. "This will bring in something," she said. Not much, but enough. Wyatt looked at the plates, then at her. You don't have to, I know. She sat. And I want to. He held her gaze for a moment longer than before. Then he nodded. All right. The nights changed after that. The lamp stayed lit longer. The table moved closer to it. A notebook appeared, thin and worn, a pencil sharpened down to a short length. Lorraine placed it in front of him. Write your name, she said. Wyatt took the pencil. His fingers held it carefully, as if it might break if pressed too hard. He looked at the page, then at her. Show me once. She leaned forward, her hand moving across the page in slow, steady lines, each letter placed without hurry. When she finished, she set the pencil back in his hand. Wyatt tried. The first letter tilted. The second pressed too deep. The third came out faint. He paused, then tried again. Lorraine did not correct him right away. She waited. When he finished, she nodded. That's it. He looked at the page, then at her. A small shift passed across his face. Not pride, not surprise. Something quieter. The days grew shorter. The cold held longer. One night, as the wind pushed against the walls and the fire burned low, Wyatt set the pencil down earlier than usual. I was chosen because I don't matter much, he said. The words came without warning. Lorraine did not move. He kept his eyes on the table. Easy to place, easy to forget. The fire cracked once. I figured, he went on, slower now, when the weather turned, you might head back. Find something better. Lorraine looked at him. He did not look up. I wouldn't stop you, he said. The room held still around them. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Lorraine rested her hand on the table, not reaching, not closing the distance, just placing it there. I know, she said. Nothing more. Not yet. Wyatt nodded once. He stood, moved to the fire, and added a small piece of wood. The flame lifted, then settled again. The space between them remained. But it had changed. Not wider, not smaller, just no longer empty. Morning came without hurry. The cold had eased a little in the night, enough for the frost on the window to melt into thin lines that caught the light. Lorraine stood at the stove, watching the kettle begin to tremble before it spoke. She poured water into 2 cups, the sound steady, familiar now. She placed one near the edge of the table, then the other across from it. Wyatt came in from outside, brushing the chill from his coat with the back of his hand. He stopped when he saw the cups already set. Not unusual, but something in the way they were placed held him there a moment longer. He took his seat. Lorraine remained standing. We're married, she said. Wyatt nodded once. I know. She rested her hand on the back of the chair in front of her, fingers still, not gripping. But I want to choose it, she said. The words did not rise. They did not ask for anything. They simply stood where they were spoken. Wyatt looked at her then. Fully. The room held quiet around them, the kind that did not press, only waited. You mean, again, he said. Yes. A small breath passed between them. Wyatt reached for the cup, but did not lift it. His hand rested against the warmth. We don't have much for that, he said. Lorraine's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Not quite something else. We don't need much. He studied her for a moment longer. Not searching, just making sure he understood what was being offered. Then he nodded. All right. The day carried the news the way small towns do, not in announcements, not in letters, just in quiet words passed from one person to another. By late afternoon, a handful of people stood outside the church. Not many, just enough. Mrs. Dalton was there, her shawl drawn tight, her grandson at her side holding a small book under his arm. The man from the general store leaned against the post, hat low, watching without comment. A couple from down the road stood near the steps, their boots leaving light marks in the dirt. Lorraine wore the same dress, pressed clean, mended where it had worn. No ribbon, no lace. Wyatt stood beside her in his best shirt, the same one from before, collar set straight, hands open at his sides. The preacher stood between them. The door behind him remained open, letting in the last of the daylight. "When you speak this time," he said, his voice low, "you do it by your own say." Lorraine met Wyatt's eyes. He did not look away. "I do," Wyatt said first. The words came the same as before, but they stayed differently. Lorraine felt it. "I do," she said. No hesitation, no weight held back. The preacher closed his book. "That's enough," he said. No applause followed, just a quiet shift in the air, like something had been jammed back into place. Wyatt reached out then, not quickly, not taking. His hand stopped just short. Lorraine closed the distance. Their fingers met. Simple. Certain. After, there was coffee poured from a tin pot. A small cake Mrs. Dalton had brought, cut into pieces that did not match but were enough. Voices stayed low. Nothing carried too far. As the light faded, people drifted away. No one lingered longer than needed. When the yard emptied, Wyatt and Lorraine stood alone near the steps. The sky stretched wide above them, the first stars just beginning to show. "How do you feel?" Wyatt asked. Lorraine looked out across the road. The same road that had brought her here, the same road that still led away. "Like I'm standing where I'm meant to," she said. Wyatt nodded. They walked back together. The house looked the same. The door, the window, the worn edge of the steps. Inside, the table held the 2 cups from the morning, still sitting where they had been left. Lorraine moved first, clearing them, setting them side by side near the basin. Wyatt hung his hat by the door. The fire was lit again. The room warmed. Days followed. Work came slowly at first, then steadier. Wyatt found a place repairing fences for a ranch farther west. He brought home coin, small at first, then enough to hold. Lorraine kept teaching. More children came. Then a few from beyond the creek. She moved the table aside to make room. Books stacked higher. The pencil wore shorter. The house shifted to hold it all. A second chair added, then another. One afternoon, a letter arrived, folded clean, sealed without flourish. Wyatt set it on the table. "For you," he said. Lorraine opened it, read it once, then again. When she finished, she folded it along the same lines and set it down. "What is it?" Wyatt asked. She looked at the paper, then away. "He's gone," she said. No name needed. Wyatt waited. Lorraine stood still for a moment, her hand resting lightly against the table. Then she turned back to the stove. "Water's near empty," she said. "I'll fill it." He took the bucket and stepped outside. The door closed behind him. Lorraine picked up the letter. Not to read, just to hold. Then she placed it in the drawer and shut it. The day moved on. Seasons changed. The house grew in small ways. A board replaced. A window widened. A shelf added where none had been. People came. A man once asking for a place to sit a while. A woman another time needing quiet. A child with a torn book and questions that took patience to answer. Each time Lorraine set water to boil. Each time, Wyatt made space. One evening, as the light settled low and soft across the yard, a knock came at the door. Not urgent, just present. Wyatt opened it. A traveler stood there, hat in hand, dust along his coat. "Could I trouble you for some water?" he asked. Wyatt stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, Lorraine reached for another cup. She set it on the table beside the others. The kettle warmed. The room held steady. And in that small, ordinary moment, the life that had once been handed to her stood quietly, fully her own. If you stood there long enough, you might start to wonder what you would have done in her place. Would you have stayed quiet when the paper was set in front of you? Would you have walked that same road, not knowing where it led, or who would be waiting at the end of it? Because sometimes, life doesn't ask what you want. It just places you somewhere and waits to see what you do next. Lorraine never raised her voice. She didn't fight the way people expect, but she did something harder. She stayed. She watched. And when the moment came, she chose, quietly, firmly, on her own terms. That's the thing about second chances. They don't always arrive as a door swinging open. Sometimes they look like a small kitchen, a worn table, and someone who knows how to step back instead of step in. And maybe that's where real love begins. Not in grand promises, but in the space someone leaves for you to breathe. If this story reminded you of someone, or something you've lived through, I'd like to hear it. You can share it below. And if you're still here, there are more stories waiting. Stories about people who found something worth holding on to, even when life didn't make it easy.